It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Buongiorno tutti. Good day, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to the Phil Ferguson Show. I am so very delighted that you are here. We've got a lot of good stuff coming up in the show. I'm going to talk about an organization called NEXO. That was something that a listener sent to me. And then after that, we're going to have a really nice long interview with two gentlemen, Ethan Gregory Dodge and Ryan, forgot his name off the top of my head, but it's in the segment. So Ryan, my apologies. But they founded Truth and Transparency organization, website, and we're going to talk all about that and some of the amazing secrets they've been able to bring to the world about religious organizations and how they cheat and steal and molest/rape children. So I think you're going to enjoy that. And of course, we also talk about their personal deconversion stories. They are both former Mormons, ex-Mormons. So I think you're going to enjoy that an awful lot. And I'm going to keep the opening segment here a little short because we have so much good content coming in a few minutes. The one other thing I wanted to throw in is I had a listener to the show, because I have some of the smartest listeners out there. A listener to the show did a spreadsheet, and they took a lot of the funds that I recommend, and they created a spreadsheet, and they went over the last 6 years, rebalancing once a quarter, which not something I recommend, so I want to make that sure that that's clear. It's not necessarily once a quarter. Matter of fact, I think most people are better off looking at their portfolios once a year. But whether it's quarterly or annually, he was going through rebalancing, and after 6 years found out the result was just about equal to the result of doing nothing. And so he wanted to know if he had made a mistake, if he had missed something, and I'm pretty sure that what he calculated was correct. And part of the reason for that is that in the last 6 years, which is the time frame that he looked at, and I think maybe even the last 9 or 10 years, the value of rebalancing has not been as good as it can normally be, in part because most bond funds right now, at least if you have conservative safe bonds, which is what I'm currently recommending for the cushion, they're all making about 2 or 3%, maybe 4%. So changing between a 2% and a 4% bond doesn't change the outcome very much. Also, in the U.S., large cap growth, and then, of course, mid cap and small cap growth have done better than all of the value positions. So if you sell some of the growth funds and put it in the value funds, I was actually kind of surprised that the result wasn't negative. And then in international, I've been gradually recommending moving more and more into international. If I go back all the way to 2008, at that point in time, I had maybe 8 to 10% in international, whereas now, a decade later, I might have 20, 25%, maybe even a few percentage points more in international. So I am adding to things that haven't done as well and taking away from the things that have done well. I don't know that he's gone that far. He's probably just doing a straight rebalance. And the problem is, as long as things continue to do what they've done for the previous couple of years, rebalancing in the short term doesn't produce much help, much progress. And matter of fact, if you take the look at the numbers that you have today and look backwards, it might look like you're underperforming. So the rebalancing does a couple of things. One, is it dramatically reduces the volatility in your portfolio, just in general. 2, it even more dramatically reduces the volatility when things change. And things for the last several years haven't changed. Growth has beaten value. Large caps have beaten mid caps and small caps. U.S. has beaten international. Bonds have been poor performers for most of the last 10 years. And of course, if you use the funds that I'm recommending for the cushion, mostly are very conservative bonds, because if there's a big market correction, you don't want a lot of junk bonds or international bonds or risky corporate bonds that are going to go down the same time the stock market goes down, because that kind of defeats the purpose of the cushion. So if we get a change, and changes do come, the question is when? I have no idea. It could continue to be that the biggest of the big large cap growth stocks continue to win for the next year, for the next 2, for the next 5. But it is well known and documented over 100 years of data that there are a large period of times where value stocks outperform growth stocks. Matter of fact, if you pick up a book that's 5 or 10 years old, it will talk about how on average value outperforms growth by about 1%. But that has not been the case in the last 10 years. It's probably growth has outperformed value by 3%. But again, things change. So when those things change, you don't want to make the adjustments after they've changed. That's part of the rebalancing. It's automagical. You are regularly, habitually pulling money out of the things that are high, and you're adding them to the things that are low. I'm sure you all are familiar with buy low, sell high, but you can get periods of time where certain things behave a certain way, and they keep behaving that certain way for several years at a time, and we are now in one of those points. And so the longer that large cap growth beats everything else, the less desirous I am to have a large position in it within my portfolio and within my clients' portfolios. So far, according to this listener, we've not really done any better, but we've not done any worse. And by rebalancing, you have a more conservative, less volatile portfolio. So it's not always about getting the best results in a given year or two, but it can also be about reducing your volatility and preparing yourself for that big systematic change that comes from time to time. So if large cap growth keeps winning, I will be wrong. It's just one of those things. You'll miss out on the big growth. But large cap growth fund and other growth funds have done very well. They're also very heavily concentrated. So that's one of the reasons you want to rebalance, because at least in the past, things change. And markets switch from large cap to small cap. Markets can switch from growth outperforming to value outperforming. You can have a switch where the U.S. doesn't do as well for 4 or 5 years and international does better. Matter of fact, I think it was year ending 12/31 of 17 where international made 32%. But the several years before that, it was awful. And in the last year or so, it's not been great either. But you had a year where it popped 32%. So that's some thoughts about rebalancing. You may not see the results in any given year or even several years, but in the long run, it adds to your portfolio. And in the short run, it does decrease your volatility and make your performance not less, but a little less volatile. So those are things that are value to me. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to go into our segment on NEXO, and then we'll have our interview segment. So don't go anywhere. It's going to be great fun.
Reverend Mesa, Reverend Rock,
I'm grateful for your generous invitation to state my views. While the so-called religious issue is necessarily and properly the chief topic here tonight, I want to emphasize from the outset that I believe that we have far more critical issues in the 1960 campaign. The spread of communist influence until it now festers only 90 miles from the coast of Florida. The humiliating treatment of our president and vice president by those who no longer respect our power. The hungry children I saw in West Virginia. The old people who cannot pay their doctor's bills. the families forced to give up their farms, an America with too many slums, with too few schools, and too late to the moon and outer space. These are the real issues which should decide this campaign. And they are not religious issues. For war and hunger and ignorance and despair, no religious barrier. But because I am a Catholic, and no Catholic has ever been elected president, the real issues in this campaign have been obscured, perhaps deliberately, in some quarters less responsible than this. So it is apparently necessary for me to state once again, not what kind of church I believe in, for that should be important only to me, but what kind of America I believe in. I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no Catholic prelate would tell the president, should he be Catholic, how to act, and no Protestant minister would tell his parishioners for whom to vote, where no church or church school is granted any public funds or political preference, and where no man is denied public office merely because his religion differs from the president who might appoint him or the people who might elect him. I believe in an America that is officially neither Catholic, Protestant, nor Jewish, where no public official either requests or accepts instructions on public policy from the Pope, the National Council of Churches, or any other ecclesiastical source, where no religious body seeks to impose its will, directly or indirectly, upon the general populace or the public acts of its officials, and where religious liberty is so indivisible that an act against one church is treated as an act against all. For while this year it may be a Catholic against whom the finger of suspicion is pointed, in other years it has been, and may someday be again, a Jew, or a Quaker, or a Unitarian, or a Baptist. It was Virginia's harassment of Baptist preachers, for example, that led to Jefferson's Statute of Religious Freedom. Today I may be the victim, but tomorrow it may be you, until the whole fabric of our harmonious society is ripped apart at a time of great national peril. Finally, I believe in an America where religious intolerance will someday end, where all men and all churches are treated as equals, where every man has the same right to attend or not to attend the church of his choice, where there is no Catholic vote, no anti-Catholic vote, no block voting of any kind, and where Catholics, Protestants, and Jews, at both the lay and the pastoral levels, will refrain from those attitudes of disdain and division which have so often marred their works in the past, and promote instead the American ideal of brotherhood. That is the kind of America in which I believe.
This Investing Skeptically segment is on crypto borrowing. That's right. I'm not even sure what that means myself. Crypto borrowing. You can borrow some money against your cryptocurrency. Of course, none of this I recommend. Let's just get that right out in front. I don't think you should own cryptocurrencies. I don't think you should lend against them. I don't think you should use this website in particular. So now that we've got that all out of the way, let's have a little fun. A friend of the show, I think I'll call him, we're going to call him Thurston because that's his name. I'm not going to give you the last name because I don't know that I have permission. But he said, hey, Phil, what do you think of NEXO? I go, I don't know what the fuck NEXO is. So he sent me a link. And NEXO is some new random company that came from somewhere and is somewhere, I guess. It's a website. And if you have cryptocurrency, you can give them your cryptocurrency, or they hold it in the NEXO wallet, and then they'll loan you money in actual real monies. And it's one of these things. It says you can borrow in 45 plus fiat currencies. And whenever someone stresses fiat currency, I know that they're kind of on the loony side of things, at least from my perspective. And I'm already worried if there wasn't 10 alarm bells already going off So let's dig into this a little bit, how it works. But before I explain it to you, I want the person at NEXO to explain it to you. And I'm going to play a little sound clip of the video where they explain how easy it is for you to do. So hang on and listen to this.
You have a loan limit equal to 50% of the Bitcoin and Ether you have deposited. For other crypto assets that you might decide to deposit to your NEXO wallets, this percentage might vary depending on their risk levels. And so now that you have deposited your crypto assets to your wallet, you're ready for step number 3, where you can immediately withdraw a loan to pay for your personal or business expenses or to pursue some new lucrative investments.
Now, I don't know where that accent is from. I guess at this point, I'm glad it's not Russian, but they're clearly not in the United States. I don't know about lending money overseas or borrowing money overseas or who I'm borrowing it from. If I'm borrowing money from somebody, an institution, a bank, whatever, I'd like to at least know where they are, and maybe that's disclosed somewhere. But the thing that you may have noticed that he said in there is that you can borrow up to 50% of your Bitcoin and other currencies. That amount will depend. And I found this wonderful phrase here. It says, the loan limit is dynamically determined by the NEXO Oracle algorithms. Okay, cool. Depending on the current and historical volatility and market liquidity of the particular assets. Your deposit, depending on the type of assets you deposit, your loan to value ratio will range from 20 to 50%. I continue reading off this website. If you stake 10,000 worth of Bitcoin, you'll be able to withdraw an instant loan approximately 5,000, i.e. a loan to value of 50%. But if it's some other cryptocurrency, it might be as low as 20%. So it's the other thing that I'm really worried is that the loan limit is dynamically determined. What does that mean, dynamically determined? It's going to change based on some algorithm that they have created. Now, the first thing that I want to know is what happens if you put in $10,000 of Bitcoin, which we clearly stated you should own, and they let you borrow $5,000. What happens if the value of your Bitcoin falls to $8,000? Well, now you can only borrow $4,000, but you did already borrow $5,000. Is that extra $1,000 now due? Do you have to deposit more Bitcoins to keep the loan to value ratio equivalent? Or do they just say, hey, you're $1,000 under your limit, so we're going to call that loan, or we're going to sell some of your Bitcoins on our choice and collect the money from you? I don't know. I'm not seeing where that's written anywhere. Of course, that'd be something in the details. So again, you're borrowing money from someone you don't know in a weird new world, and we don't know how it works. So those are very curious questions dynamically. It indicates to me that, because, if you're borrowing against your asset, in this case, Bitcoin, and I have scare quotes around the asset. If you're doing a conventional loan at a bank and they determine that your house, your land, or your car is worth dramatically less than it was a week ago, they probably have provisions where they could ask for more collateral, just like if you leverage in future trades or something like that. So that's kind of weird. I assume that if the Bitcoins go up, you get to keep the bonus value because it's always yours. But and then they charge you interest. And the funny thing is they don't charge you interest in Bitcoins. They charge you interest in the money that you borrowed and the currency that you borrowed it in. So if you borrow US dollars, it's 6% interest, which is not particularly high. But if you could get a loan against your house, like a home equity loan or a car loan, you probably today in the United States at least, and definitely in most of Europe, get interest rates lower than 5.9%. So it's just a curious new thing in the world here. So it's definitely something I would not do, and it's something that clearly I would recommend against doing. But that's some quick thoughts on NEXO. And of course, It's always going to be in the details. And if someone wants to spend the time to really dig into a contract or figure out what you've got to sign or agree to when you do this, let me know if anyone ever does this, because I'm not going to go that far into it. But that's a little bit about NEXO.
I like how you call homosexuality an abomination.
I don't say homosexuality is an abomination, Mr. President. The Bible does.
Yes, it does. Leviticus
18:22.
chapter and verse. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions while I had you here. I'm interested in selling my youngest daughter into slavery, as sanctioned in Exodus 21:7. She's a Georgetown sophomore, speaks fluent Italian, always cleared the table when it was her turn. What would a good price for her be? While thinking about that, can I ask another? My chief of staff, Leo McGarry, insists on working on the Sabbath. Exodus 35:2 clearly says he should be put to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself, or is it okay to call the police? Here's one that's really important, because we've got a lot of sports fans in this town. Touching the skin of a dead pig makes one unclean, Leviticus 11:7. If they promise to wear gloves, can the Washington Redskins still play football? Can Notre Dame? Can West Point? Does the whole town really have to be together to stone my brother John for planting different crops side by side? Can I burn my mother in a small family gathering for wearing garments made from two different threads? Think about those questions, would you? One last thing. While you may be mistaking this for your monthly meeting of the ignorant tight-ass club, in this building when the president stands, nobody sits.
The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investments should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
As promised, everybody, I've got a couple of sleuths with me. I think that's the right word, sleuths. I have Ethan Gregory Dodge and Ryan McKnight. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Good, Phil. How are you doing?
Wow, that pause, I didn't expect that. You guys were just so chatty pre-show.
I think we were both waiting for the other one to answer.
Yeah,
we're doing great.
So let's do this. Ethan, why don't you give me a 1-minute blurb about you so we can get used to the voice of Ethan, and then we'll do Ryan right after that.
Yeah, so my name is Ethan Gregory Dodge. I am an ex-Mormon. However, I prefer the term secular Mormon, trying to popularize the term there because I grew up in Utah, in Provo, Utah, the heart of Mormondom, I guess. And it's so much part of my identity that I want to preserve that. So secular Mormon is the label I prefer. I'm co-founder of the Truth and Transparency Foundation here with Ryan. And yeah, we're a nonprofit newsroom that is dedicated to promoting transparency within religious institutions.
Yeah, and like you said, my name's Ryan McKnight, and I'm an accountant by trade, if you will. I have a master's degree in accounting, and I've worked professionally as a government auditor for a number of years, and still work in the field of accounting to pay my bills. But yeah, Ethan and I do this Truth and Transparency Foundation as sort of a passion project that, hopefully continues to grow. But I suppose that time will tell. But yeah, I've always been passionate about appropriate transparency. Like Ethan, I'm an ex-Mormon as well. I don't really personally subscribe to the sort of secular Mormon tag, but that's Ethan's thing, which is fine. But yeah, I left the church about 6 years ago, a little over 6 years ago, and kind of stumbled backwards into this passion project of the Truth and Transparency Foundation. It wasn't part of a big sort of master plan, but we found ourselves in the right place at the right time, and it's been fulfilling. And I think we've made a difference in the Mormon community and possibly a little bit, not as much, but a little bit in the Jehovah's Witness community, and we hope to continue to push that forward.
Excellent. And of course, listeners, you can go find more on the internets, truthandtransparency.org, all spelled out, all one word, no slashes, dashes, underscores, or anything like that. Just truthandtransparency.org. And before we get into the fun stuff, I always like to talk about money. So you guys are pimping for dough. What's going on there?
Well, like any good nonprofit, we're always asking for money, but we actually are in the middle of a real serious push for fundraising. If your listeners, I don't know when this is going to be published, but if your listeners go to the website after they listen to this, they will likely see an announcement at the top of our website that says something along the lines of the truth and transparency is at a crossroads. And the short of it is that Ethan and I have been doing this literally on financial fumes, for the last 3 years. And, it's worked to a certain extent, but the lack of funding has obviously, stunted our growth a little bit. And we have tons of potential projects in the works that just literally cannot be done without some level of funding. And, we're not talking about millions of dollars, but we are in a very tight spot right now, and we need to raise between $50,000 and $100,000 probably by the end of the year for us to really continue to push forward with what we've done and take this to the next level. So we are begging right now, which we don't normally beg. We're not very good at asking for money, which is probably why we found ourselves in this situation. But we've kind of reached a point where we have no choice anymore, and so we are begging for money. We have rolled out membership plans where you get a little bit of swag. If you sign up for a particular level of yearly donation or monthly donation, there's both options. Or if you can only do, if you can send us only $1, then send us $1 too. We don't, of course, look down on the dollar donations. Everything is appreciated. We have been fortunate to have a couple of good-sized donations during this recent push, but we're still considerably short of what we need to be able to effectively move forward.
Well, I'll steal a Ghostbusters line. No donation is too small. No donation is too big.
Definitely.
I assume that. And it's one of those things that I have found that secularism, and apparently along with truth, and perhaps even transparency, are not real big money makers. And it's a weird thing because it seems like big business makes a lot of money with religion and with lies and corruption and racism. That all seems to pull in some dough, but you guys are trying to expose some of that stuff. And I know you've got on the homepage top stories. What are your favorites? And we'll do this again. We'll start with Ethan. Why don't you give me one, and you can both, of course, talk about it. But Ethan, your choice.
Ooh, that's a hard one.
I know.
So, before I get into that, we used to be called Mormon Leaks and Faith Leaks. That's actually how we got our start. We launched Mormon Leaks back in 2016, and it was exactly as it sounds. We were leaking documents from the Mormon Church, and then we got some success there, and then we expanded to Faith Leaks, and we were doing the same thing, but for other religions, and released some documents from Watchtower, which is the governing organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. So we've actually been releasing stuff longer than what our truthandtransparency.org website suggests. And we're in the middle of a transition of a rebrand. Well, we're still a rebranding is always difficult. So soon, all those stories that we released with Mormon Leaks and Faith Leaks will be much more integrated into the Truth and Transparency website. But as far as my favorite story that we've broken, I'd have to say that it's by far our most influential one, and that is the story of Sterling Van Wagenen. For those who do not know, Sterling Van Wagenen is actually the co-founder of the Sundance Film Festival with Robert Redford. Robert Redford actually married his cousin, and that's how they knew each other. He is a very prominent Mormon filmmaker. He's made a lot of films that if any of you know Mormons, you can probably go and look up all the films that he's been on, and they will recognize over half of them. But he also directed probably the most sacred Mormon films, if I can say that. Mormons go to their temple on a regular basis, and their temple is different from where they go to church every Sunday, and it's where they participate in very sacred and very secret rituals. And the rituals are actually carried out by a series of videos, and he directed those videos. That's not, we're kind of the first ones to publicly acknowledge that. That's not necessarily public information, other than we have corroborated it from multiple sources. But anyway, what the story was is we actually outed him as a child molester. Our source came to us, who was a victim of Sterling Van Wagenen, this victim, or survivor rather. His name is Sean Escobar. And if you actually go and Google Sean Escobar New York Times, you'll see a profile that the New York Times did on him because of this story. He was at a sleepover. He was very good friends with Van Wagenen's sons. They're the same age as him. He was at a sleepover at the Van Wagenen's house and woke up, and Sterling Van Wagenen was groping him. That we released a tape of Sean, now as an adult, confronting Sterling about that night, and Sterling admitted to everything. And we released that tape, and that actually empowered another victim of Van Wagenen's to come forward to the police. And Van Wagenen is now behind bars because as a direct result of our reporting, and because of the bravery of that second survivor.
Well, so, that is fantastic. You said movie director. I'm assuming he had nothing to do with September Dawn.
No,
I'm actually not familiar with that title.
No, he didn't. He would have been, and I believe still is, even though he's sitting in a jail cell. He is a active believing Mormon, so he wouldn't have been involved in a movie like that. And he actually, as far as his connection to Sundance and Robert Redford, he was the original executive director as well as the co-founder for many, many years. But he kind of moved on to other things about 10 or 15 years ago. So he hasn't had a formal role in Sundance for about 10 or 15 years, approximately. I don't know the exact year. He did not, he met Robert Redford when, neither one of them were super, super famous. And Sterling Van Wagenen still isn't super, super famous. He did not go on to have the same success that Robert Redford did, although he did direct a movie that was not Mormon related, where one of the actresses won an Academy Award. Huh. So he has done some things that have had an impact outside of Mormonism, but I would say the majority of his involvement and notoriety is around specifically Mormonism, producing and directing Mormon-themed films that are funded by the church, and then also spending a number of years as a professor in the film department at BYU, which is the Mormon church-owned university. Yeah. And during that time, he was also, I can't remember his title, but he oversaw BYU TV, which is a television station. I think he was like the content director or something like that. It just
sounds creepy to me anyway. But just in case listeners didn't catch my apparently way too subtle of a joke, September Dawn is a movie from 2007 about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, where the Mormons had a little run-in with some people in wagon trains trying to get across the country, and they happened to stop in Utah. So, Anywho, enough of that. Let's see. We started with Ethan, right? So, Ryan, if I have this right, if not, correct me. What is your story that you want to go to?
Yeah, well, like Ethan, it's hard to pick out one. I think I'll briefly touch on three that I think are very impactful. One of the things that really helped us have success is that our very first leak when we launched our website was providing documented proof of how much the top Mormon clergy make. And we didn't necessarily provide proof of the entire amount of their compensation package, but at least some base numbers, like a base stipend, if you will. And I don't know if it's a lot or a little. That's all sort of perspective. I think the most recent we published multiple documents related to pay. I think the most recent one was a 2014 memo that put their base stipend at $120,000 a year. And I do believe that they have COLA increases every year on a regular basis. So I'm sure it's more than that now. And the reason why that was impactful was not necessarily because, $120,000 makes you a filthy rich person, but there is this sort of undercurrent, often unspoken, sometimes spoken understanding that there is no paid clergy in Mormonism. And whenever pressed in the past on, how are these top leaders who are dedicating, 100% of their time to this endeavor live, it's often been referenced through official channels that, they receive a modest stipend to sort of cover their basic living expenses. And so I think most people, whether they thought that their work deserved a base salary of 120 or not, I mean, that's, every person's going to have a different opinion on that. I think most people would agree, both active Mormons and ex-Mormons and anybody, that $120,000 a year, especially in Salt Lake City, is not a modest stipend. Now, maybe if they were living, in San Francisco, maybe that would be a modest stipend. But $120,000 will take you very far in Utah. So that was a big one. It caused discussions that had really never been had online. It caused people to sort of rethink the way they look and approach, this concept of them, quote unquote, not getting paid or whatever. Another big one that we had, it didn't get as much traction, I think, as we liked. This is another one that was published under the Mormon Leaks website. And it was, we were able to connect $32 billion in stock investments to the Mormon Church. Now, it has always been known and acknowledged by the church that they do invest money, including in the stock market, but they've never put a number on it. And I don't think any Mormon would have ever sort of, if they were going to guess, would ever come anywhere close to $32 billion. And, we actually were able to do this through, I don't want to get too much of the details because it'll probably take me a very, very long time to explain the whole thing. But ultimately, we proved this through information that is public, but it's kind of like a needle in a haystack. Like, if you don't know where to look, then you don't know it's there, type of thing.
Yeah. That stuff's all out there, but
right.
You just got to go dig it.
If you don't know, you don't know. So that was impactful, and we're working on a follow-up story to that that'll probably come out soon to sort of update what the current value of that portfolio is, because that $32 billion number, if I remember correctly, was an as of end of 2017 number.
And I'm sure that's what you found, not
There's
necessarily everything.
Yes, we have very strong evidence with our sources that it's really only scratching the surface. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to point out as well that's just their investments in the U.S. stock market, as you said, that we know about. But we also know about a lot of real estate investments that they have as well. That is fairly public knowledge. And I'm sure that is just the tip of the iceberg as well. So, the value of the Mormon Church is just unfathomable.
Well, I do happen to know, I used to live in Danville, Illinois, in the county there is called Vermilion, that the county often wanted to do some large projects and build an area for warehouses or factories or whatever, distribution centers. And time again, when they dug into who they would have to buy the land from, it kept coming up with the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it turned out that they are the single largest landowner in the entire Vermilion County area. And I don't know why, but someone told me that's one of the magical places where something's supposed to happen.
Yeah, and they're also people don't know. You can Google this. This isn't our reporting, but they are also the largest single landowner besides the government in the state of Florida.
I actually think it's debatable that they actually have more land than the government in Florida.
You think they might have more than the government?
It's something ridiculous, like over 300,000 acres in Florida. Like they own 2% of the land in Florida.
It's more than 300,000 acres, but I'm pretty sure. But yeah, no, it's like 2 or 3% last time it was sort of tabulated. So it's a massive amount when you think about it.
Yeah.
Yes, excuse me. So the third story I guess I would touch on that had a decent impact. Again, impact is in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. But we got a tip and we followed through with it. We were able to sort of obtain some court records that were somewhat difficult to obtain. And something that we discovered earlier this year was that there was a young man who lived in Utah with his parents, as a teenager, and his parents ran a daycare in their basement, like a formal sort of registered, daycare. And his bedroom was next to the bathroom that the children used. And for many years, he set up hidden cameras in the bathroom and filmed these kids in various states of undress, going to the bathroom, changing into swimsuits. And we're talking about, preschool and below age children, by the way. He was trading these images on, sort of the dark web, if you will, for other supposedly more explicit child pornography. And so anyways, and there's no indication that anybody knew about this while it was going on, by the way. So he does this, and then he goes on his Mormon mission at the age of, I don't think he was exactly 18, but I think he was maybe 19 or very close to his 19th birthday. And he gets shipped off as a missionary to I believe it was the Dominican Republic, if I remember correctly. Well, very shortly after arriving in the Dominican Republic, he has sort of a quote unquote come to Jesus moment of guilt, and confesses these crimes. He probably saw it as confessing sins, but I would say he confessed these crimes to his mission president, who is the sort of ranking clergy member in the Mormon Church who oversees the missionary program in each individual area where there are missions. So, initially the church does what most people would consider to be the right thing, in that they send him home immediately from his mission within a day or two. Now, what happens after that is interesting, because they sent him right back home to his parents' home, where they were still operating a daycare. And not only that, but there were still kids in that daycare that ultimately turned out to be, victims of his earlier, when he was doing this.
Right.
And so anyway, for some reason, now the parents then abruptly, unexpectedly, we talked to, patrons of the daycare, and it was totally unexpected. All of a sudden, shut down the daycare. And this was 3 or 4 months after he came home. No explanation given. Fast forward another 6 or 7 months approximately, and lo and behold, he goes and turns himself into the county attorney's office there in his jurisdiction. And we've published a document, I believe it was the search warrant, which contains a very detailed summary of his confession. It's very disturbing. So, trigger warning if people want to go and read it. I think it's valuable, but also just, trigger warning. And, so he ends up, it's unknown to this day why he turned himself in. The best speculation that I've seen is, and there is some evidence for this in the court documents, is that, he does say he was working with his local leaders through the repentance process, and that also he was in counseling. And so the leading theory is that he told his therapist about this, and the therapist said, "Hey, I'm a mandatory reporter, so you either go turn yourself in or I'm going to have to make a phone call." And so anyway, he ends up, even though he was charged with crimes, if I remember correctly, he admitted to doing this from the ages of like 14 up to his 18th birthday. And he was charged specifically with incidents that occurred when he was like 16, I want to say. Not 14, but when he was an older teenager. And the attorney, when they contacted the district or the county prosecutor, and his attorney said, "Hey, I've got somebody that wants to come in and confess to this child pornography, but they're not going to do it, and I'm not going to tell you their name unless you preemptively agree to charge him as a minor." which they do. Okay, and which I suppose they have the right to do, but as you know, a 16-year-old that's dabbling in the manufacturing of child pornography is quite serious. We're not talking about a dumb teenager that stumbled onto a website and
Right.
let curiosity get the better of him or whatever, which could be somewhat more sympathetic. But he was actually engaging in the purposeful manufacturing of this material and then sharing it online. And so they agree to this. They go through the sort of process to plead guilty, and he pleads guilty about, I want to say it was like 12 weeks before his 21st birthday is when the final sort of guilty plea was entered. And in Utah, like many states, you can't, no matter what the serious nature of the crime is, if you are going to be charged as a juvenile, you can't be in juvenile detention beyond your 21st birthday. So the judge, even though he was disgusted by what happened, was forced to simply sentence him to be in juvenile detention until his 21st birthday, which was like 12 weeks later. So it's very interesting, and we don't suggest that the church enabled his abuse or whatever, but they did unnecessarily, in my opinion, put him in a situation where he could potentially continue the abuse. Now, we don't have any evidence that he did do that after he was sent home, but he was in an environment where he could have. And the reason why the church can get away with this in Utah is because in Utah, clergy are only mandatory reporters when the victim or somebody with knowledge of the abuse goes to the clergy member. If the clergy member learns of the abuse from a confession from the perpetrator, they are not mandatory reporters in Utah. And, I think most people would agree that if you were a parent of one of those children and you find out that proper measures were not taken as soon as the knowledge came to light, I think it shows a very dangerous and problematic set of circumstances, and it makes you wonder how often this goes on. And, we know it goes on more than just this case because we also published a while back some internal documents from the church's law firm about notes on cases they were dealing with involving abuse of minors sometimes and whatnot. And it was very clear that the church does not mandatory report when they're not required by law. And in some cases, the argument could be made that they try to sort of keep the situation as such. For example, we had a case in those documents that there was a missionary who admitted to something that was potentially sexual abuse of a minor, and they were faced with possibly sending him home. But sending him home was to a state where clergy are mandated to report, and he was on his mission in a state where they're not. And these notes indicate that the church told the attorneys that they do not want to send him home for that reason.
Wow. Yeah, that's unfortunate stuff, and sadly it's not limited to the Mormon church. We all know that. If I can segue into a totally different thing, I hope totally different, I want to go through briefly deconversion stories. And Ethan, I'm going to have you chime in first and tell us when and how you got out and what helped you get out.
Oh, yeah. So it's a great question. It's a loaded question. I will try and do it as succinctly as I can.
That's all right.
But yeah, I mean, I was born into the Mormon church, I was born to goodly parents. As if you have any Mormon listeners, they'll know what I'm referring to.
They were goodly, and they were, what is it, whitesome and delightsome?
Yeah. Yes, my parents. Yes, I'm actually an 8th generation Mormon on both sides of my family, and they both sides of my family crossed the plains from Nauvoo, Illinois, to Salt Lake City, and my ancestors settled many cities throughout the western United States. So yeah, my pioneer stock goes way back, yeah, I mean, I was born, not only was I born to a Mormon family, but I was born in Utah in the heart of Mormonism. And all of my friends were Mormon. Everybody at school was Mormon, right? Like in Mormonism, they call your congregation a ward, and my ward was literally just 2 blocks, and then 2 blocks down the street was a different ward, because every single house in the neighborhood was Mormon, and so the wards were so big because everybody was Mormon.
And is this in Salt Lake or Provo?
This is in Provo.
Okay.
This is in Utah County. So the biggest Mormon populations in Utah are in, arguably anyway, there's 2 major valleys, Utah Valley and Salt Lake Valley. And Utah Valley it's about 80% Mormon, whereas Salt Lake Valley is about 50 to 60% Mormon. Like 95% of my high school, this is not an exaggeration, 95% of my high school, the students were Mormon, right? So, and it was kind of one of those things, like, if you weren't keeping the standards that the church told you to keep, you, like, everybody knew about it, right? And there was a lot of shame and social guilt associated with anything, with breaking those standards.
So it sounds like a normal high school sucks, but this is kind of on steroids if you don't fit in.
100%. Yeah, totally. And it's and I think, looking back, I had a lot of cognitive dissonance about it, because like I liked to I really like music, and I liked to listen to a bit harder and darker music than was most of my Mormon friends were listening to, and I always felt guilty about that, right? But I was also a really fucking good kid. But I always felt like a bad kid because of that. And then also, I just like most Christian religions, I grew up in a very sexually repressed environment. And so my teenage sex drive, I also felt very guilty about, even though I didn't kiss a girl until I was 17, and I only kissed one girl all through high school, but I felt extremely guilty about those kind of things. But it wasn't until I was married with 2 children, that I kind of started realizing, hey, this is kind of fucked up, right? That this is, I don't want my kids to be raised with the same shame and guilt that I was raised with, right? I want them to be self-aware and self-empowering, and the environment that I grew up in just does not fit that description at all. So that was actually one of the biggest reasons why I decided to at least kind of drift away. However, when I kind of came to that realization, I had it in my mind that I could still stay a Mormon and just kind of do it my own way. But then I started learning a lot more things about the secrets that the church doesn't want us to know, such as like one thing that I felt very betrayed about was Joseph Smith, quote unquote, translating the Book of Mormon using a rock in a hat.
It's a seeing stone, not a rock. So let's be fair.
Yeah, seer stone. Thank you. And the church came out with an essay publicly acknowledging that was the case, and I felt particularly betrayed by that because I served a Mormon mission for 2 years in Guatemala, teaching people that was not the case, and I literally, like, in the church's missionary manual, it says that Joseph Smith got gold plates, right? And Mormons still believe that the gold plates existed. The church hasn't denied that by any means. But never anywhere in the manual did it say that the Book of Mormon, or even the majority of the Book of Mormon, or even a piece of the Book of Mormon was translated or written by Joseph Smith looking in a hat with a seer stone in it.
Yeah,
right?
I always wondered about those plates because the Book of Mormon is, I don't know, like 600-something pages. And so if there's a dozen plates, that font had to be really fucking small. Yeah.
That's if only we could see the plates, right?
Yeah.
See exactly what they looked like. But yeah, it's anyway. So that was one of the biggest things that felt very betraying to me. And then ultimately, what led me to come to the conclusion that I didn't believe anymore was that. When I realized that Joseph Smith had a very magical and superstitious worldview, and that likely all of his revelations and the religion that I had grown up believing was built on a magical and superstitious worldview. And that's when I was like, yeah, I don't believe this anymore.
And how are things with the family now? And I'll leave that vague. You go into as much or as little detail as you want.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. My wife left at the same time that I did, and her family is still in, and things are fine there. No serious strains. It might be mostly superficial, but that I don't know that we can ever get past that. And then with my family, the majority of my family, not all of my family, but the majority of my family is also out. So things are, in terms of religion, things are fine there. So that said, I know many people who have not been as fortunate in salvaging their relationships with their family after leaving the church, and it's extremely disappointing and very sad.
Absolutely. And Ryan, can you give us a little recap on what you went through and how it happened for you?
Yeah. I'm going to hit mute for a second and cough. You can.
You bet. I'll just pretend like I'm talking with something intelligent to say, and the listeners will never be the wiser.
So yep. I have a similar but different story to Ethan. I did not grow up in Utah. I've never lived in Utah. My family's not from Utah, although on my dad's side, we do have roots that trace back to not Joseph Smith days, but Brigham Young days is when that side of the family sort of joined the church. My mom is a convert to the Mormon church, so her side of the family is not Mormon. And I also moved around a lot as a kid. And we moved every 2 years, and basically my entire sort of formative years were spent living overseas in South and Central America. And the schools that I went to, there were very few, if any, Mormons. So in that sense, I didn't live in a very tight Mormon bubble because I've had very, very few Mormon friends. But I'm a little older than Ethan, and so the internet and social media didn't really exist. I think the first time I ever used the internet was like 10th or 11th grade in high school. And of course, the internet back then was nowhere near what it is today.
Right.
So, I was indoctrinated with the belief since I was young, and I had those indoctrinations were reinforced with, certain life experiences throughout the years. And I had really no reason to ever doubt anything. And I was, even as I went into adulthood and, social media starts to blossom and the flow of information starts to increase. And I was back stateside at that point. Somehow, I was living in Las Vegas, which is where I live now. I still was sheltered from almost all critical information about the Mormon Church, and what little critical information I may have ever heard, it was typically so ridiculous that it wasn't even anything you would even entertain as being possibly true. Like, Mormons have horns on their head. There are certain evangelical strains in the Deep South back again before internet that used to literally say that. So it's easy to sort of demonize critics of the Mormon Church when they make declarative statements like that, and it's easy to dismiss them. So I really was completely unaware of any real controversial or reason to leave the church. I didn't really even know anybody that had ever left the church. I knew people who stopped going to church, but it was more like, they just didn't like being told what to do, or they were supposedly lazy, or what have you. At some point, I was about 32. I had a brother-in-law and a sister who had left the church, and it was really sort of unknown why. And I'd heard it was about polygamy, so I started to Google something just to try to understand. And then, of course, the floodgates opened. I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically, people that are familiar with all the problems in Mormonism, I basically found them all within a matter of 2 or 3 months. It was a severe shock to the system, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And it was very traumatizing for me because at the time I was afraid to tell my wife about it, because I kept reading these stories online about men, sometimes women, but mostly it was men, who would tell their wives about these things they were reading, and all of a sudden, the wives were giving them ultimatums and leaving them.
Right.
And, setting aside, this newfound information about the church, I had no reason to want to get divorced. So, and I kind of felt that my wife would possibly fit into that category, because my wife was always very, very stalwart Mormon. And so I kind of kept it to myself, which increased the trauma of it. And, it was a mental anguish, but it was often so bad that it hurt physically. I've said this before. I mean, it would literally hurt physically as I would read things and follow footnotes to the source documents and realize there's no denying X, Y, and Z. And how could I have gone 32 years of my life with never having ever even heard a whiff of these things? How is that even physically possible? I'm not a stupid guy. So it was troubling. I finally did tell my wife, because I just couldn't sort of live this secret life anymore of a doubter. I hadn't necessarily arrived at non-belief yet, but I was a massive doubter.
Right.
And, to my wife's credit, she never once, getting a divorce over something like this was never even hinted at.
Right.
She wasn't happy. She wasn't necessarily super supportive of it, but she didn't close her eyes and ears, and she was willing to read what I was reading, and she was willing to acknowledge things that, were sort of impossible to deny. And at some point, we kind of arrived to an agreement, that, she would go to church and I would not try to stop her. And she wants to take the kids to church, she can, but I'm not going to go. And, eventually she ended up sort of finding her own way out. Initially I tried really hard to sort of convert her out, and that backfired, which often does.
Yeah. I know that feeling.
Yeah. And so, it took her longer to get there. That's all. So about 10, less than a year later, I don't know exactly how many months, but less than a year later, my wife, ultimately, came to the conclusion that I did. And so we've lived the last 5 or 6 years as, non-Mormons and, I suppose ex-Mormons as well, and, here in Las Vegas, and it's been mostly good. There's no sort of necessarily, very unique reason that I left the church. It's, if you go on to ex-Mormon Reddit, or you go to sort of, there's a website called Mormon Think. If you go to any of these websites, that sort of, there's a document out there called like the CES letter that kind of gives a explain it like I'm 5 overview of all the problematic issues.
Yeah.
If you go and read that content, you basically will be able to peg sort of the main reason, that caused me to leave the church. And I was very active on Reddit, fleshing out ideas as my paradigm was shifting, my world paradigm was shifting, and all this kind of stuff. And I was also active on Facebook in a lot of different groups. One of them being a private Facebook group, like one of those ones you can't search. Like you have to actually like know how to get to it or be invited to it.
Yep.
And somehow I got in. I don't remember how I got in, but it was mainly comprised of ultra right wing. This was probably before like the term alt right had been coined, but it was essentially sort of like the early days of alt right Mormons, which and all of Mormons, whether they recognize themselves as alt right or not, a lot of Mormons share in some of those ultra conservative ideologies. And so I was in there not pretending to be sort of sympathetic to their views, but I was there sort of pushing back, needling them. And there was a couple other people like that. And, they tolerated us. Sometimes people like me would get in there and sort of cross the line. They'd get kicked out. But I essentially became their whipping boys. It was fun to sort of needle them a little bit. And somebody in that group at some point, at the time I didn't really know him, but he was, somebody who was on his way out of the church. And he was in the group for similar reasons to me, posted in there about this new policy change that the church had just enacted. And this was November 5th of 2015. And the gist of it is that they enacted a policy quietly. They didn't announce this publicly. They just sort of quietly slipped it into the, management manuals, if you will, that the children of same-sex couples can no longer be baptized until 2 criteria are met. And one of them was they're 18 or older. And the second criteria was that they disavowed their parents' same-sex marriage or union or cohabitation or whatever.
Wow.
This was shocking to me, not because I was surprised that the church, was going to put in some sort of, homophobic policy, but this was the most overtly homophobic that the church had ever been publicly, right? Before this, it was always sort of like innuendo and undertone and sort of legalistic softening of the language, if you will. And so I actually doubted it. I really didn't even think this was true. So I took a screenshot of what this person posted and kept their anonymity. And I posted it on Reddit Ex-Mormon. And I posted it in another Facebook group that was for ex-Mormons that had a massive audience, like probably 20,000 people, very active. And I simply said, does anybody know if there's any truth to this? Well, it immediately went viral. Somebody who at the time and still is sort of a very prominent ex-Mormon, reached out to me, said, where are you hearing this? And I kind of said, hey, well, it's this guy. I mean, keep in mind, I'm a nobody. I'm still a nobody, but at that time I really wasn't nobody. I was just some guy on the internet. So once I gave this guy the information, he kind of ran with it. They ended up getting a copy of the actual memo, and it went all the way up to being covered by the New York Times. It's often referred to as the November policy. So the guy that I got this information from at the time was not interested in being named publicly because he was kind of still going to church and whatnot. And I was fine with being named publicly. So this guy that had reached out to me went onto Reddit and named me as his source. And so a lot of people who were following closely knew that. And people would send me other things from time to time, mostly not newsworthy. But then about just shy of a year later, in October of 2016, somebody sends me 15 videos that are closed circuit recordings, not secret recordings, but actually imagine a board meeting where, people might be sick or whatever. And so they record it so that those that were not in attendance that need to listen to what happened can listen back. Right.
Sure.
But obviously not meant for, public consumption. And it involved what is called the 12 apostles, which is sort of the governing board, if you will, the board of, this would be similar to like the board of directors of a corporation. And, some of the videos vary in level of boredom and newsworthiness, but there was definitely some interesting stuff in there. And so this person said, hey, I've had these for a long time. If there's any way you can put this out there without it tracing back to me, feel free to do it. So I just on a whim create a YouTube channel called Mormon Leaks. I throw these videos up, I publish them. And, I knew they were going to get a lot of attention in the ex-Mormon community, but I did not realize how viral they were going to go. There were some videos in there that contained content that was newsworthy on a national level. And so much so that, not only was I being interviewed now by left and right by people, in Utah and other places, but the New York Times ended up running a really sort of thorough profile on the whole situation. So now, unlike with the November policy, my name was very, very much in the open, and I, was started to get bombarded with things. And that's, when Ethan and I hooked up, and Ethan is the tech guy, I'm not. And so, he was able to, sort of stand up this website that can protect sources and their anonymity and whatnot. And we launched it kind of like a Field of Dreams situation. We didn't know what was going to happen. Build it and see what happens. And very quickly we got some, like I said earlier, we got those documents about the clergy pay at the top. And I think because that was our first leak, it really proved the concept that there was actually a need for this type of outlet. And so we published all these things, and it's evolved into, because, Ethan and I, evolved into sort of wanting to get more and more serious as time went on. And like we launched Faith Leaks to sort of go and expand to other religions. And we wanted to start doing our own investigative reporting and publish articles like you see now on Truth and Transparency. Like when we were doing Mormon Leaks, all we would do is we had our own our own Wikipedia, right? And we would just create wiki entries for these documents with a very sort of vanilla description of what the document was. And we would let people sort of, decide what the implication of those documents were. Some would get picked up by the media, some wouldn't. But anyway, we wanted to evolve into doing.
I'm going to jump in because I know Ethan warned me that you are a talker, and which is good for a podcast because I just kind of sat back and hear all these cool stories. And so as long as I'm entertained, I know my listeners are going to be. but we met our 15-minute minimum half an hour ago. No, it's all good. So is there anything about you guys, about truth and transparency, that you want to kind of wrap up with? How can people send you documents? How can people learn more? Or how can they help? Of course, remind them about the donation thing.
Yeah, okay, I'll say something about that, and then, Ethan can wrap it up. But, you can go to truthandtransparency.org, obviously, and read about our donation drive. You can read about us, on the About page. You can, click on the Submit button and read the instructions about how to submit, and Ethan maybe can touch on the details of that if he wants to. But listen, we have those that are aware of our content and have noticed the silence from us over the last couple of weeks. We really are at a crossroads. For us to continue doing this, we must raise at least $50,000 in a very short period of time. I think we're at, just under 20 right now. And people, when they go to click on the donation link, they'll see this current campaign and they can see where we're at. We need to get there. So if anybody can throw any amount of money, like you said earlier, large or small, doesn't matter. It helps. It would be greatly appreciated, and it will go to a good cause. You can go and click on our finances. We publish our finances, so it's all out in the open. No secrets. You can email us and ask us questions about exactly what we're doing with the money if you don't already know. We're not secretive about any of that at all. So we would encourage people to reach out to us in that fashion. And I think that we are in a position to grow this organization and build on the impact that we've already had into something that becomes even more impactful across the country and possibly the world. So please go to our website, support us, read our content, reach out to us, interact with us, and yeah, that's it. And we appreciate, Phil, you having us on to be able to talk about this, just to build the awareness, because that's what this is all about.
I like it.
The lack of awareness.
All right, Ethan, what do you got to close us out?
Yeah, kind of just echoing what Ryan said. Like, we've kind of gotten some shit from people for not releasing a lot of things in a while, but a lot of people don't realize that this, like Ryan said at the beginning, this is a passion project. This is something we do on the side. We both have young families and full-time jobs, right? And so literally the biggest thing stopping us from progressing is funding. Right. We need money. We hate asking for money, but here we are. We need it, or else we're probably not going to be around for much longer. We are literally sitting on thousands of documents and dozens of stories waiting to be published, but they're not going to be published if we don't get some funding pretty soon. So
I like it.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I just said thanks for having us on, Phil. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure to thank you both for coming on, and I greatly appreciate you being on the Phil Ferguson Show, and I hope we can connect in the future and talk some more. Thanks a lot.
Great.
A lot of people come up here and they thank Jesus for this award. I want you to know that no one had less to do with this award than Jesus. He didn't help me a bit. If it was up to him, Caesar Milan would be up here with that damn dog. So all I can say is, suck it, Jesus. This award is my God now.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
So make sure you go check out that website, Truth and Transparency. Maybe you can get some stories on there, share, or donate a few bucks to help out the cause of alerting the public to the evils of religion. A quick side note, I found out again from a listener, because I have the smartest ones out there, iTunes, Apple, I guess, has started to phase out iTunes. It's something we have talked about months ago, but he all of a sudden couldn't find my podcast on iTunes, couldn't locate it, sent me a couple messages. I saw that I'm still getting iTunes downloads from Spreaker, the hosting website for my podcast, the original source of it where it's stored. Turns out that iTunes is now not carrying podcasts, and there's a separate app, but it only apparently applies when you put in the new operating system. So I'm not 100% sure of the details of how this works, but I wanted to let you know that if all of a sudden you can't find the show in the next few weeks and we're in mid-November of 2019, that you may have to get the Apple Podcast app. So something to be aware of and something to look for so that you don't miss any of the episodes or have to go through the painful burden of catching up on 3 or 4 or 5 if you don't figure it out right away. But pay attention to that as you update your Apple operating system on your PC or laptop, that you might not be able to get this show or other podcasts on iTunes, and you might have to look for an Apple podcast player of some kind. Speaking of computers, I don't think I've mentioned this. Hopefully I'm not too redundant, but I did get a new computer. And the funny thing is, I was ready to buy an Alienware device, and I think that's Dell's brand, one of Dell's brands. And I had it all picked out and had all the specs, and they had a sale on the memory, and it was a good price for a fantastically powerful machine. And I called up to ask a couple of questions, and then I was going to buy it. But their service team and the person I ended up talking to was not particularly good in English. And I understand, having learned a second language, that's not everybody's skill set, but I don't understand why I can't call a company in the United States as a U.S. citizen and get someone who's fluent in my language, especially when I want to spend $1,500 on a computer. So that didn't go well. I ended up getting frustrated and ended the phone call. And then I actually went to a website called Newegg, where I've bought some electronics before. I should get paid for mentioning Newegg, but I'm not. Went on there and found a company called ABS, I think it is. Yeah, good thing I'm not getting paid for this because I can't even have the company's name right. I think it's ABS, and they take the newest, hottest, off-the-shelf equipment and put together a PC, not for you per se, but they might build 100 versions of a certain computer. So I got this brand new, over-the-top, crazy, it's technically a gaming PC. It's got this brand new high-end chipset that's liquid-cooled and has a fan, and it's got all these LED lights and the tempered glass side panel so you can see everything inside and all the blinking lights, which is kind of neat. But what I wanted it for, particularly, was the 1 terabyte solid-state drive, which is smaller, maybe half the thickness of a cigarette pack. And how far we've come. So 1 terabyte of data on there, and I've now done some recording and saved files, something that might have taken me 4 or 5 minutes to save on my old computer took about 30 seconds. So I'm very excited about that time saver and the increased performance and all that fun stuff. But a little adventure on my computer. The next thing I'm getting, hopefully in a few days, is a stand-up desk. And it's got a little electric buttons on it. And I plug the desk into the wall, and it's going to go from seating height to standing height. So if you've had any experience with those and have any warnings or advice or certain kind of stool or chair I can use while it's up high. I also bought a little foot pad that you can stand on. It has different textures and terrains so that even while you're standing, your feet aren't always flat. So you can put one up on this little riser and then the other one, and just, a little variety. So I'm not sitting so much because I sit way too much and I need to do more motion, more moving activity. And hopefully that desk and some of the other features that come with it will help out. But going to wrap up the show. Again, thank you for listening. Go leave a review on iTunes if you can, or on this new Apple podcast player, which I'll have to see how I can learn about that. And I'm assuming they'll have reviews there. Stitcher, you can go leave reviews there. And if you have questions about investments or anything else going on in your world, let me know. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. Email phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. And as a quick safety reminder, security reminder, don't send me documents. Just send an email. Send your phone number. That's really handy because a lot of these issues get complicated, and just a sentence or two of response in text might lead you down the wrong direction. So I'm not really a typer, not really a writer. I'm a talker. Send me an email with your phone number. We'll talk. If you get all your questions answered, that's fine. You go on your way. No harm, no cost, nothing. I'm just helping out. But if we talk a couple of times and then you want to send me documents, or if you then want to hire me, I do this for a living, so that's not bad either. But just let me know. Anyway, gonna wrap up. And of course, go leave those reviews. Oh, almost forgot Patreon. If you like the show and you want to skip the ads, go to patreon.com/Phil. And for as little as $1 an episode, you can become a patron to the show. Thanks for listening. Have a great day, and I hope to see you out there on the road somewhere soon. Until then, ciao.
Let's kick it. All right, stop. Open your Bible and listen. Pastor Frank is about to start preaching. The Holy Spirit grabs a hold of me tightly, pouring blessings over me daily and nightly. He will never stop. Oh, I know. Seek him always and you'll grow. At the foot of the cross, I take off my sandals, giving him my burdens and the rest he can handle. Pray, crush the enemy, he's doomed. Sending him straight to the emergency room. Godly, crucified so we can be free. He gave us life and we are his prodigy. Love him or leave him, you better pick a way. There's two paths to choose and God don't play. If there was a problem, yo, he'll solve it. Check out the Bible while the worship revolving. Jesus Christ, baby. Jesus Christ, baby. Wait, girl, I don't think they hear you out there. I said Jesus Christ, baby. Now that the church is jumping, the Bible open to John, it's thumping. It's straight to the point, no Satan. And then I'm skating. If you love God, you gotta stay humble. He goes crazy and the walls will come on a high cloud. He's watching us closely. We're no Catholics, but grab your rosary, heathens. You gotta listen close, it's a heart problem. You gotta diagnose. The sound crew on standby, ready for an open fight. You gotta look up, cause he's gonna fight. Be ready. He's coming any second. Repent for your sins and you'll go to heaven. We were dead, yo, so we decided on CCV. Coverage Apple Avenue Christians. So read your Bible discreetly. We're rich in Christ, don't need Lamborghinis. Jealous, Satan's almost out of time. Jesus is the branch and we are the vine. Ready for God to take us all. Heathens, listen up, it's almost curtain call. Trumpets roaring out like a bell. Listen, let's go to heaven, not hell. Falling on my knees real fast. Not sure what day will be my last. Bumper to bumper, Calvary's path. I'm trying to get a seat that's not in the back. Our sins have been clean, you know what I mean. He died for us, perfect for the ones ever seen. If there was a problem, yo, he'll solve it. Now give your life to him and God will revolve it. Jesus Christ, baby. Jesus Christ, baby. Jesus Christ, baby. Jesus Christ, baby. My soul for him. Jesus Christ, baby. My soul is yours. Jesus Christ, baby. Take it all. Jesus Christ, baby. My soul. Drops mic. Walks off stage. Hold on, wait, girl, I'm coming back.